What if someone told you that the most powerful being in the universe was walking through your town, healing the sick, stilling storms, raising the dead, and all he asked in return was that you follow him? How would you respond?
That is the exact scenario playing out in Matthew chapters 8 and 9. And the answers people gave back then are surprisingly close to the answers people give today.
Welcome to Matthew, the King and His Kingdom, Portraits of Jesus. I'm Jon, joined as always by Lauren, and today we are in Lesson 4, titled, Power the King's Rule on Display.
We're covering Matthew chapters 8 and 9, and the aim of this lesson is to appreciate how the miracles of Jesus demonstrate his divine rule and authority. Last week, we were in the Sermon on the Mount, hearing the king declare the priorities of his kingdom. This week, we get to watch him back every word up with action.
That's such an important sequence, isn't it? Matthew is very intentional about this. You get chapters 5 through 7, the teaching, and then immediately chapters 8 and 9, the doing, the word and the power, side by side.
And the lesson actually highlights that Matthew 9:35 is almost a word-for-word repeat of Matthew 4:23. Let me read that so we can feel the bracket Matthew is creating. Matthew 4:23 says, "And Jesus went about all Galilee, teaching in their synagogues, preaching the gospel of the kingdom, and healing all kinds of sickness and all kinds of disease among the people."
And then Matthew 9:35, which is our key text for this lesson, says, "Then Jesus went about all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues, preaching the gospel of the kingdom, and healing every sickness and every disease among the people."
Those two verses act like bookends, one at the start of this whole section and one at the close, wrapping the Sermon on the Mount and these 10 miracles together into a single unified portrait of the King and his kingdom.
Teaching and miracles together. That is the gospel of the kingdom. You cannot fully separate what Jesus says from what Jesus does. The agenda and the rule belong to each other.
So let's set the scene a little. Jesus has just come down from the mountain after the Sermon on the Mount. The crowds have been following him. Matthew says his audience was astonished at his teaching because he taught as one having authority, not as the scribes. And now they're trailing him down the mountainside.
And instead of retreating or resting, Jesus immediately begins a series of miracles. The lesson counts 10 of them across these two chapters. 10. And each one targets a specific domain, showing that his power has no ceiling and no wall.
Let's name them because that list is striking on its own. Leprosy, power over disease; palsy and fever, power over sickness; storm at sea, power over nature; demonic possession, power over Satan; sin, power to forgive; death, power to raise to life; blindness, power over darkness; a mute and possessed man, power over demons.
That is an astonishing range. When you lay it out like that, you realize Matthew is making an argument. He is not just telling stories, he is systematically demonstrating that there is no corner of creation where Jesus does not hold authority.
And the lesson notes something beautiful about where Matthew starts, with the leper. Leprosy was the most dreaded disease of the day. Contagious, incurable, disfiguring. There were strict Levitical laws about it. Lepers were socially isolated. You simply did not touch a leper.
And what does Jesus do? He touches him. Not for shock effect, but to demonstrate that his holiness is not diminished by contact with the unclean. In fact, the opposite happens. The leper becomes clean.
That reversal is so theologically rich. Under the old system, if you touched something unclean, you became unclean. Jesus inverts that completely. His purity is more powerful than the disease.
Then you have the centurion's servant. This is a Gentile officer, someone completely outside the covenant community, and Jesus doesn't hesitate. He offers to come and heal the servant, which itself would have raised eyebrows.
And the centurion's response is one of the most remarkable faith statements in the entire gospel. He tells Jesus he doesn't need to come in person, just say the word, and my servant will be healed. That level of trust from someone who has no religious pedigree is stunning.
And then Peter's mother-in-law, the storm on the sea, the demoniac in the graveyard, the paralytic whose sins Jesus forgives, Jairus' daughter, the woman with the issue of blood, the two blind men, the mute man, each one a new demonstration of the same truth. The King has come, and his rule is real.
The lesson also points out something interesting about the storm account. It says that in stark contrast to celebrities who live for the stage, Jesus gets in a boat and heads away from the crowd to the other side of the sea.
He is not performing for applause. He is not building a platform. When the storm comes, he rebukes it with a simple command, and the disciples are left asking, "Who can this be, that even the winds and the sea obey him?" Let me read that from Matthew 8:26-27. But he said to them, "Why are you fearful, O you of little faith?" Then he arose and rebuked the winds and the sea, and there was a great calm. So the men marveled, saying, "Who can this be, that even the winds and the sea obey him?"
That question, who can this be, is in many ways the question Matthew is trying to answer through this entire gospel. And chapters 8 and 9 are a major part of the answer.
Okay, let's move into our talk about it questions because there is so much to unpack here. Question 1 asks, in what ways is Jesus' kingdom power and authority demonstrated in Matthew 8 and 9? And what does it tell us about his rule?
We have already started touching on this, but let's go deeper. The sheer variety of the 10 miracles tells us something important about the nature of the king's rule. It is not limited to one domain. It spans disease, nature, spiritual warfare, forgiveness, and death itself.
And that last one matters enormously. The fact that Jesus raises Jairus' daughter points forward to something even bigger. The lesson notes that ultimately Jesus' own resurrection is the proof of his victory and authority over all, and the surety that all creation will be made new at his return.
So, these 10 miracles are not just isolated acts of compassion, although they are absolutely that. They are previews. They are glimpses of what the kingdom looks like in its fullness, when every tear is wiped away, when there is no more death or mourning or crying or pain.
The King has come to defeat all that harms and kills. That is the impression these stories leave. And his kingdom is a restoration of blessing and goodness.
I think that framing restoration is so important. Jesus is not creating something alien. He is restoring what was always meant to be. When he heals a blind man, he is not doing something new. He is undoing the damage sin and brokenness have caused to God's original creation.
Which means every miracle is simultaneously an act of power and an act of love. He is not just flexing divine muscle. He is undoing the curse, one person at a time.
And taken together, the 10 miracles leave no stone unturned about the scope of that power. Disease, nature, Satan, sin, death, darkness, none of these can hold their ground in front of him.
The application for us is this. Whatever it is in your life that feels too big, too entrenched, too far gone, these chapters are Matthew's way of saying that nothing is outside the reach of Jesus' authority.
That is a word worth sitting with. Okay, let's move to question 2, which is about the responses. How do the people respond to Jesus' kingdom power in Matthew 8 and 9? And how should we respond when we read these stories?
This is such a rich vein, because the responses in these chapters run the entire spectrum of human reaction to divine power, and they mirror the ways we respond today.
Let's start at the beginning. The leper in 8:1-2. Matthew 8:2 says, "And behold, a leper came and worshipped him, saying, 'Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean.'" This man has come to Jesus before any personal experience of healing. His faith precedes the miracle.
And that is a specific kind of faith, isn't it? It's not faith that is earned through prior experience with Jesus. It's faith based on what he has heard, on reputation, on the word that has gone ahead of the king.
The centurion is the same way. He comes to Jesus, and his humility is extraordinary. "Lord, I am not worthy that you should come under my roof." He recognizes both Jesus' authority and his own position relative to it.
And then there's Peter's mother-in-law, whose response is almost effortlessly beautiful. Jesus heals her fever, and she immediately rises and serves them. There's no fanfare, no lengthy speech. She is healed, and she gets up and does what she does. That is a very natural, very human expression of gratitude.
It's also a model, honestly. The response to Jesus' grace is not passivity, it's renewed service and purpose.
Now contrast that with the response after the healing of the Gadarene demoniacs. Let me read Matthew 8:34. "And behold, the whole city came out to meet Jesus. And when they saw him, they begged him to depart from their region."
They begged him to leave, the whole city. After witnessing the most dramatic display of power over Satan they had ever seen, their response was, "Please go away."
That is one of the most sobering verses in the entire gospel to me. Power and goodness were standing right in front of them, and the disruption to their economy, the loss of the pigs, was more significant to them than the liberation of a human being.
And it tells us something honest about how divine power can be received. Not everyone marvels. Not everyone follows. Some people are more unsettled than inspired.
Then you have the scribes in chapter 9 who see Jesus forgive the paralytic and immediately accuse him of blasphemy. That is jealousy and religious defensiveness masquerading as theological concern.
And yet, even in that same scene, you have other responses. The paralytic rises and departs, healed and forgiven. And the crowd. Matthew 9:8 says, "Now, when the multitudes saw it, they marveled and glorified God, who had given such power to men."
Marveling and glorifying God. That is exactly the response these stories should produce in us when we read them. Not just intellectual appreciation for a historical event, but genuine awe that leads to worship.
Because the stories are designed to move us. The person who reads these chapters unmoved is perhaps reading them the same way the scribes watched Jesus, looking for fault instead of looking for the king.
How should we respond? With the faith of the leper before the miracle, with the humility of the centurion, with the natural, grateful service of Peter's mother-in-law, and with the glorifying awe of the crowd in chapter 9.
Those are all available to us every time we open these chapters. Every single time.
All right. Question 3 shifts our attention to something Matthew weaves into this narrative that we might miss if we're only focused on the miracles themselves. The question is, what is the significance of Jesus' comments on and call to discipleship interspersed among these miracle stories, specifically 8:18-22 and 9:9-13?
This is one of those details that I think is easy to skip over. You're reading these amazing miracle accounts, and suddenly, Matthew inserts a conversation about the cost of following Jesus, or a tax collector getting up from his booth. It can feel like an interruption.
But Matthew never inserts things accidentally. The fact that discipleship calls appear in the middle of these power demonstrations is deeply intentional.
Let me read 8:18-22 because the exchange there is striking. When Jesus saw great multitudes about him, he gave a command to depart to the other side. Then a certain scribe came and said to him, "Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go." And Jesus said to him, "Foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head." Then another of his disciples said to him, "Lord, let me first go and bury my father." But Jesus said to him, "Follow me, and let the dead bury their own dead."
That is a bracing pair of exchanges. The scribe volunteers enthusiastically, and Jesus essentially says, "Do you know what you're signing up for? This is not a comfortable path."
And the second man has what seems like a completely legitimate request: "Let me bury my father first." And Jesus' response sounds almost harsh. But the point is that the call of the king takes priority over every other obligation, even the most honorable ones.
The kingdom is not a supplement to your existing life. It is a reordering of your entire life around a new center of gravity.
And then in 9:9 to 13, you get Matthew's own call. Let me read that. Matthew 9:9-12. As Jesus passed on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax office, and he said to him, "Follow me." So he arose and followed him. Now it happened, as Jesus sat at the table in the house, that, behold, many tax collectors and sinners came and sat down with him and his disciples. And when the Pharisees saw it, they said to his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" When Jesus heard that, he said to them, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick."
Matthew's call is one of the most economical and powerful conversion accounts in the Bible. He arose and followed. No negotiation, no conditions, no asking for a few days to think it over.
And notice that Jesus' authority operates in the discipleship, calls the same way it operates in the miracles. He says, "Follow me," and the transformation happens. The lesson notes that his kingly authority is seen as people respond to his word, just as the storms respond, just as the demons respond.
But not everyone responds positively. Even here, some make excuses, some find fault, some avoid the call. The Pharisees' reaction to Jesus eating with sinners is another form of resistance to the king's agenda.
And Jesus' response is perfect. Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. He is not apologizing for keeping company with the broken. That is exactly where the king belongs.
So, what is the significance of placing these discipleship moments among the miracles? The lesson makes a really important point here. The miracles demonstrate the king's divine power and his intention to restore, but they are not an end in themselves.
They cannot be separated from the divine call to believe, repent, and follow him. The power is real, and the compassion is genuine, but the king is also calling people into a relationship, into a life of following.
There is no such thing as receiving the benefits of the kingdom while remaining at a safe, uncommitted distance. Each miracle is, in its own way, a call to surrender and to worship Jesus as King.
That is worth repeating. Each miracle is a call to surrender. The healing of the leper is not just a medical event, it is an invitation. The calming of the storm is not just meteorology. It is a moment where the disciples must decide who this person is and what that means for their lives.
And Matthew himself is proof that the call works. He gets up from the tax booth and never goes back.
Beautiful. Okay, question 4 is our most personal question of the lesson. Of the 10 miracles recorded in Matthew 8 and 9, which stands out most to you? And why?
I love this question because it is genuinely open. There is no wrong answer. It is an invitation to engage personally with these stories rather than just surveying them academically.
The Teacher's Guide actually shares a favorite, and I want to mention it because it is described so beautifully. The double miracle in 9:18-26, Jairus' daughter and the woman with the issue of blood.
Let me read the opening of that account. Matthew 9:18-19. While he spoke these things to them, Behold, a ruler came and worshipped him, saying, My daughter has just died, but come and lay your hand on her, and she will live. So Jesus arose and followed him, and so did his disciples.
And sandwiched inside that journey is the woman with the issue of blood, who touches the hem of Jesus' garment. Matthew 9:20-22. And suddenly, a woman who had a flow of the blood for 12 years came from behind and touched the hem of his garment. For she said to herself, If only I may touch his garment, I shall be made well. But Jesus turned around, and when he saw her, he said, Be of good cheer, daughter. Your faith has made you well. And the woman was made whole from that hour.
The contrasts in that double story are extraordinary. One is young, one is old, one is dead, one is sick but living. One touches Jesus, the other is touched by him. One is healed by her own faith, the other by her Father's intercession.
And both are made whole. It is a beautiful illustration of the many ways Jesus finds people and restores them. No two stories are exactly alike. His grace is not formulaic.
For me, the miracle that stands out most is actually the stilling of the storm. Because unlike some of the other miracles where someone comes to Jesus with a request, the storm is nobody's doing. It just happens.
And the disciples are terrified. They wake Jesus up and say, Lord, save us, we are perishing. Matthew 8:25-27, and his disciples came to him and awoke him, saying, Lord, save us, we are perishing. But he said to them, Why are you fearful, O you of little faith? Then he arose and rebuked the winds and the sea, and there was a great calm.
He rebukes the wind and the sea, not the disciples, even though he gently addresses their fear. The rebuke goes to the storm. And then there is a great calm. That phrase, a great calm, after the terror of the storm, is one of the most evocative phrases in Matthew.
I think the reason that miracle resonates so deeply is that everyone listening to this podcast has been in a season that felt like a storm, where everything was turbulent and you could not see the shore.
And the question the disciples ask is the right question to ask in those moments. Who is this, that even the winds and the sea obey him? Because if the answer to that question is what Matthew says it is, then no storm in my life is beyond his authority.
Which brings us back to what these miracles are ultimately doing theologically. The lesson points out that, in his first coming, these acts are not the conclusion. They are a foretaste of what is still to come.
The resurrection is the promise that the kingdom is true and permanent and will fill the whole earth at his second coming. So these stories in Matthew 8 and 9 are not ancient history for us to admire from a distance. They are orienting our expectations and building our anticipation for what is ahead.
They tell us what the kingdom of God looks like when it arrives in its fullness. No leprosy, no paralysis, no storms, no death, no sin, no demons, all of it undone.
And the king who demonstrated the power to do all of that once is the same king who is coming again to do it permanently, universally, and forever.
That is the anchor these chapters give us. Let's bring this home with the reflect on it closing thought. The lesson says this. Matthew 5-7 features Jesus' kingdom teaching. Matthew 8-9 features his kingdom miracles. Taken together, we see the transformational power of the Lord's authority and rule over every aspect of creation and our lives.
Every aspect. That phrase does not leave a lot of wiggle room. Not most aspects, not the spiritual aspects, every aspect of creation and our lives.
And I think the honest reflection the lesson invites us into is this. Is there any area of my life where I have practically excluded Jesus' authority? A relationship, a habit, a fear, an ambition, something I am holding just outside the reach of the King?
Because the testimony of Matthew 8 and 9 is that wherever he is invited, transformation follows. The leper asked, Lord, If you are willing, you can make me clean. And Jesus said, I am willing. Be cleansed.
That is the heart of it. He is willing. The question is whether we come to him the way the leper came, with open hands, acknowledging both our need and his power.
I want to sit with the miracle of Matthew's own call this week, because Matthew is the one telling us all of these stories, and he tells them as a man who got up from a table and never looked back. There is a personal testimony embedded in the structure of this entire gospel.
What a beautiful observation. For me, I keep coming back to Jairus. He comes to Jesus on behalf of someone he loves, who is beyond saving by any human standard. His daughter is dead, and he worships anyway, and he asks anyway.
Intercessory faith. Faith on behalf of someone else when everything looks hopeless. That is a powerful picture for anyone praying for a loved one right now.
So, wherever you are in these stories, whether you identify with the leper or the disciples in the storm or Matthew at his tax booth or Jairus pleading for his daughter, the king is the same in all of them, willing, powerful, and present.
Next week, we will be continuing our journey through Matthew, so stay close and keep reading. And if this episode stirred something in you, bring it to your Sabbath School class, bring it to your prayer time, bring it to your Bible study group.
These are not just ancient accounts. They are portraits of a king who is the same yesterday, today, and forever.
Thanks for studying with us. We will see you in the next episode of Matthew, the King and His Kingdom, Portraits of Jesus.